The winter sun barely touched the horizon, leaving the prairie in a long, gray shadow. Snow crunched under boots, a sharp reminder that the West could kill as easily as it could feed. On the edge of a ragged canyon, a small ranch lay half buried in frost, smoke curling lazily from a single chimney. Inside, Thomas McAllister, a young priest whose faith had carried him through too many towns to count, sat sharpening a knife he didn't particularly need. His horse had thrown a shoe, forcing him to stop here, at what he thought was a safe haven. He had been traveling for weeks, carrying letters from one mission to another, trying to keep faith alive in towns that had forgotten what it meant to pray. He was cautious, careful, and solitary. The West had a way of testing even the most steadfast souls. He had seen families broken by the wind, widows left to die by the snow, and men forced into crime to survive. The first sign of trouble was subtle, hoofbeats that weren't steady, but hurried. Then the sound of a horse being dragged, a groan muffled by the wind. Thomas frowned, setting down the knife and standing. Through the fogged window, he saw them. 3 women, faces half hidden under scarves, their horses wild-eyed and skittish. There was something unnatural about them, the way they moved, confident and predatory. Before he could step outside, the women dismounted in a synchronized rhythm, their boots crunching the snow. One stepped forward, a tall woman with a scar running from temple to jawline, her eyes blazing. "You!" she barked, pointing at him. "You'll do." Thomas opened his mouth, but no words came. The other 2 circled, closing the gap between him and the porch. Who are you?" he stammered. The scarred woman's lips curled. "We're the kind the world doesn't want anymore," she said. "People like us, people like you, you're the only hope we got." He blinked, trying to understand, but the words didn't make sense. "We're bandits," the second woman said, her voice soft but cold, like a winter stream. "And we're tired of being alone. Everyone rejected us. Everyone. But you'll give us babies." Thomas felt a cold spike run through him. His mind reeled. "You, what?" The third woman, shorter, with hair the color of copper, stepped forward. She didn't smile. "We don't need your sermon. We need your seed. Your bloodline. You'll make us mothers, priest." Thomas stumbled backward, his faith faltering under the weight of this bizarre, horrifying reality. He had faced death, wolves, and outlaws before, but the intent in their eyes was something altogether different. They forced him to mount their fastest horse. His protests, prayers, and even threats were ignored. The scarred woman led the way, holding the reins with an iron grip. The wind bit at his face, snow flying into his eyes, but there was no escaping the determination behind those 3 faces. Hours later, they arrived at a hidden ranch, a place tucked between 2 ridges where the snow barely fell. A few horses grazed, their breath steaming in the cold, but the place was eerily silent. The buildings were weathered, abandoned, and half buried in snow. Thomas's heart pounded in his chest as they approached the main cabin. Inside, the air smelled of smoke and stale wood. They pushed him into a chair, ropes cutting into his wrists. "We'll be staying here," the scarred woman said, pacing in front of him. "And you'll help us." Thomas swallowed hard. This is wrong. You can't. I'm a man of God." The second woman laughed softly, a sound that could chill marrow. "God doesn't care for us. He abandoned us. But you're not like everyone else. You will do what needs doing." The copper-haired woman knelt before him, her green eyes burning. "You'll carry our hopes. You'll make us mothers. And you will do it willingly." Thomas's mind raced. He could think of no escape. The ropes were strong, the windows barred. Outside, the snow stretched for miles, a blank white wilderness that would swallow him if he ran. He had faced violent men, greedy thieves, and savage outlaws, but these women. There was something desperate, something feral in them. I won't," he stammered. The scarred woman slammed a hand down on the table, making him flinch. "You don't have a choice, priest. Not anymore. You are ours for now. And you will help us. Or you'll suffer." There was a long silence, broken only by the wind howling through broken shutters. Thomas looked at their faces and saw not just desperation, but years of being cast aside, beaten down, and mocked. It didn't make what they were doing right, far from it, but it explained the fire behind their eyes. They were survivors, forged in cruelty, and now they had found him. He swallowed, praying silently. Not for escape, not for mercy, but for strength to survive what was coming. He didn't know how long he could resist them, or what fate had in store. But Thomas McAllister had survived worse in his 32 years, and he would survive this, somehow. The scarred woman circled him, watching his reactions. You'll come to understand. In time. We're not evil, priest. Just hungry for life. And you can give it to us. Thomas's eyes followed her, a storm of fear and disbelief raging inside him. Outside, the snow fell silently, covering tracks, hiding secrets. And inside, 3 bandit women had made him their prisoner, their salvation, and perhaps their curse. The night settled in like a shroud. Thomas could hear their quiet whispers as they planned, moving around the cabin, preparing for a winter he didn't know he'd survive. The fire sputtered in the hearth, barely keeping the chill at bay, but it illuminated their faces, faces hardened by pain, longing, and something unyielding that would not be denied. And in that moment, Thomas realized that in the Wild West, faith alone might not be enough. The next morning, the wind cut sharper than a knife, rattling the thin walls of the cabin. Thomas McAllister awoke to the sound of hushed voices, the shadows of the 3 women flickering against the walls like ghosts. He rubbed his wrists where the ropes had dug deep into his skin and realized they had loosened them slightly overnight. A faint hope stirred. He might have some freedom of movement soon. The scarred woman, whose name he still did not know, sat across from him at the table, sipping coffee from a chipped mug. She didn't speak at first, merely observing him, her eyes calculating. The copper-haired one moved about, stacking wood for the fire, while the third, the soft-spoken, dark-haired woman, tended to a small, scraggly garden outside the cabin door, a surprising act of care in such a harsh environment. "You're thinking," the scarred woman said finally, breaking the silence. "Thinking about escape. Or resistance." "God. All of it." Thomas met her gaze, heart hammering. I don't know what you want from me. I'm a priest. I serve God. You serve the world that rejected us," the scarred woman cut in sharply. "The world that spat us out and left us to die. You can make us whole again. You can give us what no one else will." Thomas swallowed, trying to steady himself. He had faced outlaws, thieves, and murderers before. But these women were something different. Their desperation gave them a strange kind of power, a magnetism that could twist reason into fear. They were not men seeking coin or vengeance. They were lost, abandoned, and deadly determined. The dark-haired woman looked up from her work at the window. "We're not cruel, priest. We only want family. Something real. Something we've never had. We've lived off fear and stolen meals for too long." Thomas shook his head. This isn't the way. You can't force someone." The scarred woman slammed her hand on the table. "No one will give us children willingly. No one. We've been rejected, scorned, hunted. But you're here now. And you can give us life. Don't argue with fate, priest. Don't fight what has come." Thomas felt a cold dread settle over him. He had prayed for guidance, for safety on this journey, and yet here he was, trapped in a frozen cabin with 3 women who intended to bend him to their will. He realized that brute force alone wouldn't win this fight. He needed to be clever, patient, to understand them, and perhaps to reach some part of them that still remembered mercy, humanity, or reason. As the day stretched on, the women worked around the cabin. They cleared snow, repaired broken fences, and even tended to a small herd of sickly goats. Thomas noticed subtle cracks in their armor, the way the copper-haired one flinched at sudden noises, how the dark-haired one's hands trembled slightly when she thought no one was looking, and the scarred woman's occasional moment of hesitation when she stared at the horizon. That night, the 3 sat around the fire, sharing a meal that was as meager as it was hearty. Thomas, bound to a chair, observed them quietly. "You've been alone a long time," he said softly, surprising himself. Why bandits? Why this life?" The scarred woman's eyes softened for a fraction of a second. "We had no choice," she murmured. "The world left us nothing but shame and hunger. We survived. But it was always survival, never living. And now?" Thomas asked, leaning forward slightly. "Now you've found me. But what if I refuse?" She smiled, faintly, like a shadow of hope flickering in darkness. "Then we survive another winter without the one thing that could give us life. But we won't let you leave. Not yet. Not until you understand." Thomas felt a shiver run down his spine. Understanding what? Their pain? Their desperation? Or the impossible demand they had made of him? Over the next days, he observed them closely, learning their patterns. He noted how they protected each other fiercely, their loyalty bound by shared suffering. He also saw cracks, moments when they were vulnerable, when fear crept in, when the weight of what they were planning pressed down on them. He realized that survival and family were intertwined for them, twisted together like roots under frozen soil. One evening, as the fire burned low, the scarred woman approached him. Her face was grim but not cruel. "We're not monsters, priest. The world made us into them. But we can still be mothers. You can help us." Thomas shook his head, swallowing hard. I cannot. Not like this. You cannot take what you want from me by force. That is not life. That is not God's way." The copper-haired woman stepped closer. "Do you even see us? All the doors closed to us. We've been hunted, mocked, beaten down. You could give us hope. Even if it's only a chance." Thomas looked at them and saw something heartbreaking. Their power, their determination, their threat, it was rooted in pain, rejection, and abandonment. And in that pain, he saw echoes of his own mission. The helpless children he had saved, the widows he had prayed for, the towns he had tried to keep from despair. A plan began to form in his mind, not of escape, not of confrontation, but of understanding, of leverage. If he could show them a way to survival without destroying their humanity, perhaps he could guide them back from the edge. He had to survive. And if he survived, maybe, just maybe, he could save them too, from themselves. As the fire sputtered and the wind howled against the cabin, Thomas realized that the true battle wasn't strength versus strength. It was trust. Fear versus hope. Desperation versus faith. And if he played it right, he might live through this winter, and leave the bandit women with something more than just survival. But the night was long, and the cold cut deep. And outside, the prairie lay blank and endless, hiding secrets and dangers that could swallow them all. The days grew colder, the wind sharper, until the snow drifted high against the cabin walls, almost swallowing the place whole. Thomas McAllister had settled into a routine that was as much survival as strategy. He learned the women's patterns, their moods, their tempers, and the moments when they softened, glimpses of the human beings behind the hardened exteriors. The scarred woman, whose name he now knew as Mara, was the leader, fierce and unyielding, but not without doubt. The copper-haired one, Lila, had a temper that flared quickly but also moments of fragile vulnerability. The dark-haired one, Celine, carried the weight of hopelessness in her eyes, moving silently, tending to small chores with mechanical care. Together, they were unstoppable, but together, they were also fragile. Thomas had prayed in secret, not for escape, but for wisdom. How could he survive this without becoming a monster himself? He understood their demand. He saw the pain behind it, but he could not yield to it. That line he would not cross. And yet, he also could not provoke them into violence. Every word had to be measured. Every gesture calculated. It was Mara who finally broke the uneasy tension one night. She stormed into the cabin, snow clinging to her coat, eyes blazing. "You think you can outsmart us?" she demanded. "We've survived this long, priest. And you're still standing here, deciding what to do with us. It's time." Thomas met her gaze, calm despite the storm inside him. "I don't intend to fight you," he said quietly. "But what you want, It will destroy you. It will destroy all of us. There is another way. Mara laughed bitterly. Another way? There is no other way. The world rejected us. You're the first man who hasn't. You'll give us children, or we'll die trying. Selene stepped forward, hesitating. Mara, maybe he's right. Maybe we're too desperate. Maybe this isn't the way. Lila shook her head violently. We've waited too long. We can't give up now. Thomas seized the moment. I understand your pain. I understand your loneliness. I see the world has beaten you down, taken everything. But I can help you survive. Truly survive. Not by forcing life from me, but by building something better, together. You can't undo the past, but you can choose the future. Mara's eyes narrowed. What are you saying? I'm saying, Thomas replied, voice firm, we can survive the winter. We can protect the ranch, tend to the animals, gather food. You don't need children from me to live. You need hope. You need a future that isn't built on fear and force. For the first time, silence filled the cabin. Even the wind seemed to pause. Mara's hands trembled slightly, betraying her fury, but also the fear beneath it. Lila's copper hair caught the firelight as she bit her lip, torn between rage and relief. Selene's eyes glistened, tears threatening to fall. Thomas continued, gently, carefully. I will stay here with you through the winter. I will help you survive. But I will not be forced into what you asked. If we work together, we can find something better than this. This obsession with a past the world abandoned. I can teach you to hope, to live, not just survive. The fire crackled, throwing shadows across their faces. Mara's jaw tightened. And if I refuse? You'd have to do it without me, Thomas said quietly. But you'd also have to face what that does to yourselves, to your hearts. Hours passed. They argued, debated, stormed, and wept. Thomas said little, listening, guiding, never breaking, never yielding. And slowly, the tide turned. Mara's fury softened into exhaustion. Lila's anger gave way to contemplation. Selene's hopelessness began to feel lighter. By dawn, the first cracks of understanding had formed. Mara looked at Thomas, her face raw, lined with winter and years of pain. Maybe there is another way, she admitted, voice trembling. Thomas nodded. There always is. We can start small, survive the winter, fix the ranch, care for the animals. You can build a life that's yours, without fear, without force. And maybe, one day, when the world is kinder, your family can be real. But not like this. Not by taking what isn't given freely. For the first time in weeks, there was no threat in the cabin. No fear, no tension thick enough to choke. Just the wind outside and 3 women, battered by life, beginning to see a glimmer of hope. Days passed, and Thomas taught them how to care for the livestock, repair the cabin, gather firewood efficiently, and ration food. Mara's leadership turned from fury to determination, tempered now by reason. Lila discovered a gentler strength, helping Selene nurture a small garden that promised life even in winter. And Selene herself began to smile, cautiously, quietly, for the first time in years. Through it all, Thomas never let his own boundaries be crossed. He prayed for the women, for the land, and for the strength to endure. He saw in them a reflection of the world's cruelty, but also of its resilience. They had been rejected, abandoned, and abused, but they could be something more. Winter gradually eased into spring. Snow melted into rivulets that ran down the hills, feeding the land. The cabin, once a prison of fear, became a home, a place of work, growth, and fragile trust. And through it all, the bond between Thomas and the women deepened, built not on coercion, but on shared survival and mutual respect. One evening, Mara approached Thomas, a quiet smile on her face, a fire in her eyes no longer fueled by rage. "We owe you more than we can say, priest," she said. Thomas shook his head. "You owe no one anything. You survived. You survived yourself. That is enough." Lila joined them, brushing snow from her shoulders. "We learned what it means to live," she said softly. Celine, standing slightly apart, looked at the horizon, her eyes bright. "And maybe one day we'll find the rest of what we lost. But for now, we're alive." Thomas smiled, quietly grateful. The winter had been brutal, the women desperate, and the road dangerous, but life, stubborn and unyielding, had won. Outside, the prairie stretched endlessly, no longer a frozen wasteland, but a place where survival and hope could coexist. And inside the cabin, 3 women who had once threatened him now laughed, worked, and planned a future built not on fear, but on life. The West had tested them all, and for once, it had rewarded their resilience. Thomas McAllister, the priest who had been kidnapped in desperation, stayed through the winter. And when spring finally came in full, the 3 women stood beside him, no longer bandits, no longer consumed by their own anger. They were survivors, and perhaps, in time, they could even be something more. The snow melted, the wind softened, and the ranch, hidden in the folds of the prairie, became a place of life, faith, and fragile, hard-earned redemption.